Hello everyone, welcome to DEEPSIGHT. Let us take you on a journey through historical time and space and reveal the deep connotations behind historical events. Let us continue telling you the story of Baghdad from the last issue. Let's first introduce the protagonist who takes the stage, Hulegu. Hulegu is the grandson of Genghis Khan. His father is Tuale, the fourth son of Temujin. He is also the brother of Menggu, the fourth-generation Khan of the Mongol Empire, and Kublai Khan, the founding emperor of the Yuan dynasty. He was a former subordinate of Belgo, the king of the Golden Horde. He was also the founder of the Ilkhanate. It was he who became the destroyer of Islamic civilization and the commander-in-chief of the Mongol army, who commanded the Mongol army to capture Baghdad. In 1251 AD, Menggu became the new generation of Mongol Khan with the unified support of various Khanates. In order to appease all forces, Mongolia expanded its territory in all directions of the world based on its original vast empire territory. Menggu himself put the strategic direction in the two directions of Iran's Mesopotamia and China. Menggu ordered his other brother Kublai Khan to command the conquest of the southern Song dynasty of China, while Hulegu was responsible for the conquest of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. 5 years later, in 1256, Hulegu commanded a long-distance expedition of 150,000 elite troops, crossing the Eurasian steppe and arriving in Central Asia. As the great Khan of Mongolia and the successor of Genghis Khan, Menggu sits on the Mongolian plateau and is responsible for coordinating and supporting the deployment of all forces for support. Their youngest brother, Ali Buj, is accompanying them and assumes the responsibility of guarding their ancestors. In that era of limited information, all the countries that were wiped out by the Mongols actually didn't realize what kind of people this group of super barbaric and powerful people were, riding on Mongolian horses that ran tirelessly and running tirelessly, and killing everyone they saw until they suffered annihilation. Backing. For Baghdad, it feels the same. The Mongolian Allied Army is a new type of army formed by the Mongolian army fighting, killing, and assimilating. Mongolia does not kill the tribes that surrender or resist surrender, so the army has gradually integrated a large number of Christian soldiers. Mongolia has no religious discrimination and no tolerance for the independence of various religions. This made some important Mongol generals also Christians. At that time, Western Europe was in the midst of a religious frenzy and was at the end of the Crusades. Baghdad is still immersed in the remnants of nearly 200 years of confrontation with the Crusaders. Since Hulegu's Mongolian army was directly targeting the Islamic Arab countries, the king of the world at that time, a very embarrassing political situation was formed. A large number of people in the Christian church believed that Hulegu's army was sent by God to help them eradicate the pagans. Invincible Army, Hulegu's army in Europe even has a resounding name, Mongol Crusaders. How did this situation come about? Let's start with the environment at that time. Hulegu is not a Christian. He is a Tibetan Buddhist. His leadership and political command are superb. Not only is he not opposed to the existence of other religions, he is also capable of integrating people of different religious beliefs. His mother, Luhathini, his favorite wife, Togs, and several key personnel, including the most capable general, were all Christians. So when they arrived at the Christian kingdoms in West Asia, these countries heard that the Mongolian army intended to conquer the West, and instead actively cooperated and sent envoys to form an alliance with Mongolia. Among them, as early as 1247, King Hutton I of Armenia sent his brother Sumpad as envoy to Mongolia to form an alliance and surrender to Mongolia. Around 1259, his son-in-law Bohemond, also king of Antioch, formed an alliance with Hulegu. Hulegu immediately established a representative in the Principality of Antioch and stationed a Mongol army in its capital Antioch, a well-deserved superpower with troops stationed everywhere. Therefore, Hulegu's army included the core Mongols, as well as the armies of Christian countries such as Georgia, Armenia, and Antioch. Mongolia also left its combat skills to these same grassland nations. Hulegu's abilities are extraordinary. He did not rely on nepotism to establish his prestige. He relied on military exploits and bravery to accumulate rich combat experience. Hulegu started from the grassroots and became an ordinary mid-level general. He took the lead in participating in the Mongolian conquest of Eastern Europe. See our past videos to learn about the complex history of Hulegu, one of the most powerful generals among Genghis Khan's grandsons. After the death of Batu, who conquered Kievan Rus, Hulegu led the 150,000 Mongolian army and appointed the vanguard force led by the first general of the Mongolian Western Expedition, Siege Baghdad. After setting off from the Mongolian plateau, we walked and played. At the beginning of the expedition, the Hashishins, who had been running rampant in the Middle East for a long time, were easily eliminated. This terrorist sect that frightened the Seljuk Empire and other regimes at that time was just an appetizing snack in the eyes of the Mongolian army. In 1256 AD, they passed through Samarkand and finally crossed the Amu Darya River on January 2nd. Ahead is the goal of Hulegu's trip, Baghdad. As a symbol of Islamic Arab civilization, his goal is very clear. If Baghdad is captured, the Arab Empire will fall apart as a whole. Let us take a look at the Abbasid dynasty at this time. After the 10th century, the Abbasid dynasty quickly declined. The struggle for power within the ruling class has become increasingly fierce, and the contradiction between the ruling class and the broad masses of the people has become increasingly intensified. In 1055 AD, the Seljuks, who emerged from the Turkic tribes in Central Asia, captured Baghdad and became the real talkers who used the caliph as a puppet. The leader of the Seljuks, Tugrul, was given the title Sultan. After the Seljuk Arabs became the actual rulers of the empire, they never took the risk of losing their orthodoxy and replacing them with a caliph. They very cleverly used the political, religious, and ideological social influence of the Baghdad Caliph to consolidate and develop their power, coerce the emperor to order the princes, and establish the Seljuk Empire. During the reign of Malik Shah, 1072 to 1092, the power of the Seljuks reached its peak. The Seljuk Empire was divided due to multiple sultans competing for power, and at the same time they had to face the invasion of the Crusaders from Europe. Mustansir, the last puppet of the Abbasid Caliphate, is a mediocre and incompetent person in the historical records that can be found so far. When Hulegu's Mongol army was 2 days away from Baghdad, Hulegu wrote an ultimatum to the Abbasids to surrender to the Mongol army. At this time, the Mongolian army had wiped out a series of Middle Eastern countries such as Khwarezm and Seljuk along the way. The cruelty of the Mongols in these countries had been heard all over the world, but Mustansir, who was slow to respond, still went his own way without fear. As the leader of the Islamic world, Mustansir has shown a super tough attitude. He sternly warned Hulegu to stay away from Baghdad. He wrote in his letter, "When a young man succeeds in his ambition, he despises the world. You don't know that from east to west Africa, from emperors to beggars, all those who believe in Allah are my servants. I can order them to be summoned." Then, what made Mustansir miscalculated was that Islamic regimes such as the Mamluk dynasty in Egypt and the Ayyubid dynasty in Syria were either dealing with the invasion of the Crusaders or were frightened by the Mongol legends. Looking at the Arab world, there was no one like him. His so-called minions sent troops to help him fight against the Mongol army. Hulegu was furious after reading the letter and led his army in person, passing through Kermanshah and Hal Bay and heading south to the Tigris River. On January 18, 1258 AD, various Mongolian armies arrived in Baghdad one after another. After regrouping, Hulegu's overwhelming Mongolian army set up camp in the eastern suburbs of Baghdad. The number of the Mongolian legions was far greater than that of the Baghdad defenders. The Abbasid army had been abandoned long before Mustansir came to power, and the Arab army that once conquered Eurasia had long since disappeared. Not only that, the Abbas regime was falling apart, and the prime minister had sent someone to ask Hulegu privately to surrender in order to survive. On January 17th, Mustansir sent 20,000 troops in an attempt to take advantage of the Mongolian army's long-distance attack to gain a foothold and launch a surprise attack on the Mongolian army. However, the Mongolian army had rich experience and adopted a strategy of luring the enemy deep into the territory to fight and retreat at the same time. Base's army led into the distant plains. The Mongolian army immediately opened a nearby dam and diverted water to flood the army. Most of Abbas's soldiers were drowned alive. January 18th. After setting up camp, Hulegu ordered his army to attack the eastern part of Baghdad. The The troops defending the city stood on the high wall of Baghdad and saw the endless Mongolian army outside attacking like locusts. They knew that the end of Baghdad was coming. On January 22nd, Mongolian general Baiju led his army to occupy positions on the western outskirts of the Tigris River. On the other side of the river, Hulegu personally led his army and cowardly completed the siege of Baghdad by forming a formation. On January 30th, the Mongolian army began an all-out attack on Baghdad. The siege warfare that the Mongolian army was good at frightened the defending army. The Mongolian army had the most powerful siege equipment in the Middle Ages. The counterweight trebuchet was also called Frank cannon and ballistae. When the siege equipment came into use, the Mongolian army set up these equipment on mounds above the ground level to storm Baghdad. At this moment, the people of Baghdad are completely surrounded by fear. The bustling city of Baghdad has become a hell on earth. Stone bullets, arrowheads, and even incendiary weapons rain down from the sky every day, destroying beautiful buildings and streets and killing citizens who have nowhere to hide. After a week of siege, the streets of Baghdad are littered with lying corpses. The biggest victims in the war were the weak people. Baghdad's solid city walls were attacked by the Mongolian army for many days. The brutality of this war is comparable to the Mongolian battle against Xiangyang City and the Ottoman capture of Constantinople 100 years later. The casualties of the Mongolian army were equally tragic. After all, this was a siege of the world's largest city. Hulegu was extremely angry at the Baghdad people who had not surrendered for so long. He and the siege sergeants were all murderous, not intending to give the Baghdad people any mercy, any chance of escape. He ordered the army to build 2 pontoon bridges on the Tigris River, one at the upper and lower reaches of the river, thus directly blocking one's escape route on the river. Hulegu also sent an additional 10,000 soldiers equipped with siege weapons to garrison the pontoon. A Baghdad official took the risk and escaped by boat. However, the Mongolian army used siege equipment to throw stones at his boat, causing it to overturn and sink. This official miraculously survived after falling into the water and escaped back to the city alone. From then on, no one dared to escape by water. There is no escape for Baghdad. Another powerful weapon of the Mongolian army is the crossbow. Hulegu ordered all the archers in the army to stand around the city of Baghdad and shoot arrows into the city. As the arrows filled the sky and blocked the sun, they shot into the city, and the Mongolian siege war began. Towards the end, on February 1st, a tower next to the city gate collapsed completely under the overwhelming bombing. The Mongolian army rushed in and occupied the entire eastern section of the city wall, directly controlling the important strategic location of Baghdad. Baghdad was completely open to attack. The danger can be defended. At this time, Mustansir finally realized that everything was lost. During the siege of the Mongolian army, Hulegu used both hard and soft methods and promised to spare all scholars, clergy, businessmen, and others in the city if he surrendered. It is very likely that Mustansir finally decided to send an envoy to Hulegu to surrender for this reason, but he had missed his chance to make a comeback. At this time, Baghdad was already a piece of meat for Hulegu. Mustansir's surrender meant nothing to him. Hulegu flatly refused his surrender and decided to use force to completely eliminate Baghdad. In desperation, Mustansir sent 2 missions to the Mongolian army camp to beg for surrender. In order to show their sincerity, the mission carried a large amount of Baghdad's property. At this time, Suleiman Shah, the president of the Abbasid army who was in a desperate situation, had been captured by the Mongolian army in the battle. This general had defeated the Mongolian army several times, and hundreds of his family members and slaves were taken to Hulegu. After humiliating Suleiman Shah, Hulegu ordered that everyone, old and young, women and children be executed, and the heads of Suleiman Shah and his lieutenants were hung in front of the battle to shock the Baghdad army that was still resisting. On February 10th, the Basra area was destroyed by the Mongolian army, and Baghdad was completely in despair with no way out. Mustansir took his 3 sons and thousands of the highest-ranking people in the city to surrender. Hulegu showed his political skills to them. He first received Mustansir and his people politely, and then at his request, Mustansir ordered all soldiers and civilians in Baghdad to give up resistance. Baghdad finally fell completely. and Hulegu led the Mongolian army to advance into this world metropolis that had been glorious for hundreds of years. Disaster struck and glory ended. The Ilkhanate has a history of world conquerors to show off its achievements, which records a large number of great achievements of the Mongolian army in conquering various places. In 1219 AD, 200,000 Mongolian troops rushed into Central Asia, and the city of Nida, which is today's Kazakhstan, was reduced to ruins. They razed the inner fortress and city walls to the ground, and the people and craftsmen who survived the sword were taken away by the Mongols and served in the army using their craftsmanship. When destroying Samarkand, the capital of Khwarezm, Genghis Khan forced the conquered civilians in Central Asia to pile up in front of the Mongolian army to serve as cannon fodder. He used this to trap and kill the 50,000 defenders of Samarkand, and at the same time killed 30,000 Turkmen surrender troops. Finally, 30,000 craftsmen were selected from the captured civilians to reward meritorious subordinates, and 30,000 strong men were used as military servants. During the attack on Urgench, the Mongolian army encountered stubborn resistance and suffered heavy casualties. After the city was captured, in order to vent their anger, some women, children, and craftsmen were left behind, and all other male people were divided among the Mongolian legions, and all were killed by swords and arrows. What fate can an army with such a history bring to Baghdad? When the panicked Baghdad people marched out of the city and divided into several groups to surrender to the Mongolian army, the Mongolian army mercilessly violated their previous promise to spare most of the people in the city, escorted them to various camps, and then brutally slaughtered them there. In the 14th century, the Syrian historian Ibn Kathir described in his works that most of the people who lost their lives in Baghdad were scientists, medical scientists, writers, craftsmen, artists, etc. of that era, level of social elite. They, the ordinary people and their families, did not escape the bad luck and fell into dust like slaughtered cattle and sheep. The atrocities committed by the Mongolian army lasted for 40 days in Baghdad. The continuous burning, killing, and looting made Baghdad a veritable purgatory. The entire city became a sea of fire. The magnificent Abbasid palaces were reduced to scorched earth, and all the mausoleums of the caliphs of all generations were destroyed, as well as all the mosques, schools, hospitals, bathhouses, libraries, and other magnificent buildings in the city. They disappeared from the ground. The Abbasid dynasty, the peak of Islamic civilization established in 750, officially perished at this moment and disappeared in the historical process of civilization. Finally, the general of the Mongolian Western Expeditionary Army timidly advised Hulegu to stop the massacre. Otherwise, as Mongolian territory, it would lose the ability to create wealth for the new regime in the future. It is difficult to accurately estimate how many civilians in Baghdad the Mongolian army massacred. Hulegu later claimed in a letter to King Louis IX of France that they had wiped out 200,000 people. Most historians today believe that the Mongolian army massacred 800,000 people, and the people who lost their lives piled up in the cities, triggering a plague. The virus spread all the way, reaching as far away as Syria, and harmed more people's lives. Baghdad's urban infrastructure system was also greatly damaged. Irrigation systems and farmland, as well as the urban layout, no longer exist. So what was the fate of Mustansir, who surrendered? Hulegu summoned Mustansir, ridiculed him, and demanded his wealth. Mustansir paid tribute to Hulegu with thousands of robes, gold vessels, and a large number of precious stones. In order to save his life, Mustansir led people to dig a secret reservoir in Baghdad, which was filled with gold objects. This was the wealth accumulated by the caliphs of the Abbasid dynasty. All of it fell into the hand of Hulegu. At the same time, nearly 1,000 wives, concubines, and eunuchs in Mustansir's harem were distributed among his subordinates as spoils of war. Mustansir fell from the richest man in the world to nothing. Hulegu defrauded Mustansir of all his property and imprisoned him in a dungeon, depriving him of any food and water. Mustansir could not bear the pain and asked to see Hulegu and give him food. Hulegu received Mustansir and took him to his former treasury. Hulegu pointed to the treasure and said, "Just eat these things." Mustansir replied, "These are not edible." Hulegu continued, "Why were you unwilling to give me these inedible things before we invaded Baghdad?" Mustansir was kept in this vault by Hulegu for 4 full days without food. On February 21st, Mustansir, who was dying of hunger, was taken to the village of Waqf outside Baghdad, where he met Hulegu and his 2 sons. Numbly, he watched Hulegu execute his 2 sons in front of him, and then Hulegu ordered people to put Mustansir into a sack and let the horses trample them wantonly. A generation of kings is as miserable as grass. After Hulegu destroyed Baghdad, he left Baghdad on March 8th and ordered the Mongolian legions to clean the streets and restore order. Baghdad's population, productivity, and wealth plummeted after the Mongols entered, and its glory was no longer there. The Mongols not only destroyed a beautiful city, but also killed a large number of people. They ignorantly destroyed the priceless treasures of human civilization. All the handed-down books collected by the caliphs of the past generations were destroyed by the Mongols, and a large number of books that could not be destroyed were directly thrown into the river near Baghdad. For barbarians, books and civilization are just worthless incendiary items. Hulegu established his own territory in Iraq and Iran. He established the Il Khanate, a regime in the era of the 4 great Mongolian Khanates. Hulegu did not build the capital in Baghdad, the God-given garden. The capital was first built in Miyazaki. Raha, today's Maraga in Iran, later Tabriz and Sultaniya, today's northwest Iran. Baghdad never regained its past glory under the Ilkhanate. There is no historical record of the reason why Hulegu did not establish the capital of the Ilkhanate in Baghdad, but we can speculate on some possible reasons from his conquest history and political strategies. First, consider it from a strategic level. After Hulegu conquered Baghdad, he may have believed that the city was not suitable as the administrative center of the new regime due to its historical importance and symbolic significance. Baghdad had been the capital of the Abbasid dynasty, which Hulegu destroyed, probably hoping to avoid the historical baggage associated with it. Secondly, from the perspective of religious policy, Hulegu's mother and wife were Nestorian Christians, while he himself believed in Buddhism. He implemented pro-Christian, anti-Islamic religious policies in the country. Baghdad, as the center of Islamic culture, was inconsistent with the direction of his religious policy. Third, from the perspective of economic and administrative management, Hulegu may have chosen a location that was more centrally located and convenient for managing and controlling the entire Ilkhanate as his capital. The center of his rule was in Tabriz, a location that was more conducive to administrative management and economic development at the time. Finally, analyze from the direction of political alliance. Hulegu formed an alliance with the Eastern Roman Empire through intermarriage and opposed Islam. Choosing a new capital made it easier to strengthen this political alliance and also to solidify relations with the Golden Horde. After this analysis, the atrocities committed by the Mongolian Legion in Baghdad can be fully understood. The underlying reasons behind it can not only be interpreted superficially with the word brutality. Due to the early conversion of the Ilkhanate Khan to Christianity, a large number of mosques in Baghdad were demolished and converted into Christian churches, and many Muslims were also murdered. Mongolian rule had a profound impact on Baghdad and the entire Iraqi region. The city's economic and social fabric was destroyed, and agricultural and irrigation systems declined, leading to long-term decline. In addition, Mongol rule deepened the separation of Iraq from Egypt and Syria and changed the political structure of the region. This divided situation continues to affect today. Hulegu's Ilkhanate did not have long-term peace and stability. Like the Yuan Empire, it was a short-lived country, surviving for less than 100 years. After his founding, he still frequently broke out war with neighboring countries, resulting in an empty national treasury. Manpower consumption was scarce. During the reign of Genghis Khan, the Ilkhanate converted from Christianity to Islam. The Ilkhanate also launched a persecution of Christians across the country. Not only the Christians in Baghdad were destroyed, but also the Jews. There is no way to escape the fate of being implicated. With the decline of Mongolia, another country that rose up as Mongolia changed the pattern of Central Asia. Ottoman Turkey became the overlord that ruled this region for hundreds of years. It destroyed the Eastern Roman Empire and established its capital in Constantinople. Dinberg, as the leader of the new Islamic world, fought against Europe for centuries, and the glory of Baghdad has long since dissipated in burning ashes. In 1533 AD, The powerful Ottoman Turkish Emperor Suleiman appointed Ibrahim as Grand Vizier, the imperial prime minister, and led an army to march from northern Iraq, captured Tabriz from Persia in 1534. Then Suleiman led his army to make peace with Ibrahim. At the end of 1534, Suleiman the Magnificent led his army into Baghdad. Many people thought that Suleiman would be a Sunni and kill all the Shias like his father Salim. But Suleiman was full of political wisdom and treated Shias and Sunnis equally and adopted an attitude of integration. At this time, Baghdad was no longer the prosperous city during the Abbasid dynasty, but a dilapidated and devastated historical old city. Suleiman ordered the reconstruction of public facilities in Baghdad and the construction of religious temples and infrastructure. The Persian monarch Ismail, who ruled here before him, adopted a completely different strategy when he invaded Baghdad. Although his destruction of Baghdad was not as good as that of the Mongols, it was enough to make him lose the support of the local people. Suleiman's conquest of Baghdad was as significant as the conquest of Constantinople by his ancestors, Mim II, and Salim's conquests of Egypt and Syria. Baghdad was the capital of the powerful Abbasid dynasty in the past and the center of Islamic civilization. The ruin of Baghdad symbolizes the decline of the Islamic world. Baghdad has a sacred status in the hearts of many Muslims. Suleiman the Magnificent personally conquered and rebuilt Baghdad, announcing to the world that Ottoman Turkey was the new overlord of the Islamic world and that it had inherited all the glory of the former Arab Empire. Suleiman was a wise monarch. He spent half a year in Baghdad and implemented the laws and administrative system of Ottoman Turkey. He repaired hundreds of years of hatred and war between various ethnic groups and laid the foundation for this new era. The foundation was laid for the country's next 350 years of rule. The fall of Baghdad was an important event in the Mongolian Western Expedition. It not only rewrote the history of the Middle East, but was also a turning point in global history. This incident reminds us that the achievements of civilization are fragile and that peace and prosperity need to be constantly maintained and cherished. Romain Rolland once said, "There is only one true heroism in the world, which is to still love it after recognizing the truth of life." This sentence emphasizes that even after recognizing the hardship and cruelty of life, you still maintain your love for it. The love of life and the pursuit of ideals are true heroism. Heroes are not conquerors who bring disaster and killing, but people who bring peace and a better life to human civilization. They are not just warriors who resisted atrocities on the battlefield, but also those who have made significant contributions in the fields of science, medicine, culture, art, and education. They may be just ordinary people who show extraordinary qualities in ordinary lives. The real heroes may be the unknown people around us whose actions inspire us and make us believe that there is light even in the darkest moments. Audience friends, this is our content in this issue. We will continue to tell you the stories of civilizations in world history in the next episode. You are welcome to leave a message and subscribe, communicate and discuss together, learn and progress together, pursue the truth of history, and foresee a bright future. See you next time.